So, going back to our story of Moses. Moses had been shepherding a flock when God comes to him calling out as a burning bush, which is a different but also very interesting biblical story that we'll have to talk about at another time. Moses talks to God as the bush, and God tells Moses that God has been witnessing the injustice experienced by the Israelites and would like to help Moses to lead them to freedom. God says, "So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to lead my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." And here we get to the first point of Moses questioning God and doubting his potential role. Moses asks, "Who am I that I should do this?" And God proceeds to roll right over that question, saying, "Never mind that. I will be with you as you go." Moses naturally is not so sure that that's a sufficient final answer. He asks God, basically, "So who are you anyways? What should I tell my people about you? Why should they listen to me, to you? How are we going to get out of Egypt?" And God identifies God's self as the God of Moses' ancestors. God assures Moses that the Israelites will listen, that he will be successful, and furthermore, that if he doesn't do this, there's no other hope of freedom for the Israelites. Moses seems to ponder this for a minute and then asks, "What if I go back to my people and they say, 'Yeah, no, that didn't really happen. God didn't really appear to you. Whatever, dude.'" And so God gives Moses 3 different signs that he can show to the Israelites so that they will believe that Moses had contact with the supernatural, the divine. But Moses is still afraid, still hesitant. And it seems like finally he's talked around the issue long enough, and finally he just has to say it directly. Moses says to God, "Look, I'm not exactly the most eloquent person. How exactly are you expecting me to do all of this? No one is going to listen to me. No one is going to hear what I say." It seems that Moses has a stutter, or maybe a lisp, and he's afraid that at the very least, people might not hear his message because of the speech impediment. And at worst, who knows? Maybe that he'll be made fun of or ostracized. Maybe he's been made fun of it. Maybe he's been made fun of for it in the past. Been told that what he has to say is too hard to hear or doesn't matter because he can't say it as clearly or crisply as others can. There's actually a story in Jewish lore that Moses got the stutter from a test the Pharaoh had put him through as a child, in which he ended up placing a hot coal to his lips, permanently burning his mouth. After hearing Moses' protest, God basically says, "So what? You have a stutter, but so what? Don't you think I know that? I am a great being that creates bodies and mouths and speech itself. I am the being that gives humans the power of speech or takes it away. Of course I know that you have a stutter. You will go anyway. I will speak through you." But Moses argues once again, "Please, you cannot possibly ask this of me. Please send someone else, someone better, someone who is not impaired." And God says, "Nope, you're it. But fine, at least you can take your brother with you. He can help. I'll give you the word of God, and he can tell it to others." That's it. That's all that God says on the subject. Take your brother. God does acknowledge that Moses sometimes has difficulty communicating with other humans, But God refuses to see that as something that could get in the way. Take your brother. You can have some help, but you're still it. You're still my choice, and you're still going, and that's final. Take your brother. Moses goes on to meet his brother and to try for the first time to talk to the Pharaoh. Moses asks for the freedom of the Israelites, and the Pharaoh responds by asking, "Who is this God of yours, and why should I let your people go?" Pharaoh rejects Moses' request and instead makes the work and the lives of the Israelites even harder in response. The Israelites are naturally mad at Moses for doing something that has made their lives even harder. Moses and God talk, and God assures Moses that the Israelites will indeed be saved by the power of God. Moses goes out and tries to tell the people this, but no one listens. When God tells Moses to go talk to Pharaoh and the Israelites again, Moses questions God, saying, "Come on, how do you really expect this to go down? The Israelites have already rejected me once, they hate me, and they won't listen. My stutter just gets in the way, I can't carry your message." And God just says, "Nope, you still have to lead the Israelites to freedom, now get on with it." A little while later, God tells Moses and Aaron, "Hey now, it would be a good time right now to go talk to the Pharaoh about that whole freedom thing." And Moses once again brings up his stutter, saying, "Why does it matter? It won't work anyways." And God once again refuses to listen. Now we could read this as a story of Moses being petulant, obstinate, and refusing God. In a way, it almost reminds us of Jonah, a man who is seen as refusing to follow God's call, trying to run away. We could see Moses as willful and stubborn. If he would just listen and not challenge God, this story could go a whole lot faster. But I think there's more to it than that. There seems to be a deep felt pain and fear in this story that a narrative of a simply refusing Moses sort of glosses over. The second time that Moses worries to God about his stutter, saying that must be why the Israelites didn't listen, we look back at the text and find it actually tells us that the true reason is that Pharaoh's increased punishment to the Israelites was so cruel and had so broken their spirits that they were unable to hear the hope and future Moses had described. It had nothing to do with the vocal quality of his speech, but he had been so upset and afraid he couldn't think past his own insecurities. In looking at Bible stories the past few months, we've identified with the actions or motivations of different figures. But here it seems to be rather the emotions instead of the actions that are something for us to relate to and consider. In thinking about this story, I almost find it comforting in a weird sort of way. Our world today is an odd paradox of being encouraged to focus on and address our flaws, yet we also must ignore them and overcome them. We feel shame about our flaws, and then we feel shame about having that shame. Frustrated and angry with that internalized ableism, misogyny, or any other form of oppression that has worked its way into our self-conscious. I find it weirdly comforting to know that this human response has been around since the time of Moses. Not to say that this response is good or normal or holy or even okay. In fact, self-blame rooted in oppression is absolutely none of those things. But instead that it's a human response, a response that has been around for millennia, because that means that the responding to and the challenging of that response has been around for millennia too. In our other reading this morning from the book The Disabled God by Nancy Eisland, we hear of the holy act of acceptance and being with our bodies in their difference and brokenness, without attempting to change them. That there is nothing wrong or impure in disability or difference, even in pain and discomfort, even in the inability to keep up or a struggle to participate, that all bodies are still good and holy and sacred. In Moses' story, we could very easily see him as overcoming disability. He follows God's instructions and leads the Israelites to freedom. How wonderful that he didn't let his disability hold him back. But Moses didn't really overcome anything. He still had a stutter. He still struggled to communicate with others. He still held a lot of internalized ableism and self-doubt. We sometimes have this narrative of don't let any challenges hold you back. But that definitely was not Moses' attitude. Instead, he took up God's advice of take your brother and navigated his path as best he could. He let go of the myth of self-sufficiency, that to be the right prophet, the perfect prophet for God's message, he had to have a perfectly smooth voice and had to be unsullied or flawed in any way. And true, things might have happened differently if Moses had not had a stutter. But there's also some to our commentary that suggests the reason the Israelites eventually did trust Moses was because of the way that he spoke. That anyone with charisma and a solid speaking style could win over a group. But without those advantages, for Moses to be convincing, the things he did say must have been true. This doesn't make Moses extra good or holy or sacred, just that he accomplished God's charge in a way that was particularly fit to his life and body and experience. The piece of the story that still is kind of sticking with me even after a week of thinking about this is God's response. Basically saying, so what? Take your brother. Step out of this myth of self-sufficiency, even or maybe especially as you enter into this monumental task, you do not have to go it alone. Self-sufficiency is a myth and it does not belong in this work, take your brother. From the text, Aaron was coming up to meet Moses anyways, before God's suggestion. It makes me think that God would have wanted Moses to have Aaron's help, whether or not Moses had difficulty speaking. Take your brother. By working together, each was able to fully devote themselves in ways they could not if they had been working alone. Moses was able to be fully connected with God, to understand God's message, and to do his task without having to worry about how to communicate it. Aaron was able to focus on his words, his presence, his preaching, the importance of his actions, and all of the other ways that we communicate, without having to question what the message was or if he got it just right. Take your brother. As we go through this week, let us give up this myth of self-sufficiency. Let us give up the idea that we must rest in shame for our flaws, that our imperfections make us somehow less worthy. Instead, let us step into community, to be open about our needs and offer up ways that we can help each other. Blessed be.